The warm spring sun shone brightly over the peaceful streets of Silver Oak, Maryland, as 12-year-old Jasmine Carter walked home from the local library. Her dark curly hair was neatly tied back in two braids, and her favorite purple backpack bounced gently against her back with each step. Inside, three thick science books about space and astronomy waited to help her with her upcoming school project about the solar system. Jasmine had always been a good student, and her mother, Diana Carter, had taught her that education was the key to success. Though only in sixth grade, she already dreamed of becoming an astronaut or perhaps a scientist at NASA. Her teachers often praised her curious mind and dedication to learning. As she walked past Mrs. Thompson's flower shop, the kind old lady waved at her through the window. Jasmine smiled and waved back, just as she had done almost every Tuesday afternoon for the past 2 years. The familiar faces and friendly waves from local shopkeepers made her feel safe in this neighborhood where she had lived all her life. The convenience store at the corner of Maple and Pine Street was unusually busy that afternoon. Through the large windows, Jasmine could see Mr. Rogers, the owner, helping a group of high school students pick out snacks. She checked her watch. It was 3:45 p.m., and she had promised her mom she would be home by 4 o'clock p.m. to help prepare dinner. Jasmine felt proud that her mother trusted her to walk home alone. Diana had raised her to be independent but careful. Always be aware of your surroundings, her mother would say, but never let fear stop you from living your life. These words were especially important because Diana, as an FBI agent, knew both the dangers and the importance of confidence. The young girl adjusted her backpack straps and quickened her pace slightly. The weight of the books made her shoulders ache a little, but she didn't mind. She was excited to start working on her project, especially since her teacher, Ms. Martinez, had promised to display the best projects at the upcoming science fair. As she passed the convenience store, a slight breeze carried the scent of fresh-baked cookies from the bakery across the street. Jasmine smiled, remembering how she and her mom often stopped there on Saturday mornings for their weekly treat. Those quiet moments with her mother were precious, especially since Diana's job kept her busy most of the time. The sound of a car engine caught her attention. A police cruiser was moving slowly down the street behind her. Jasmine didn't think much of it at first. Police cars often patrolled their neighborhood, and her mother had taught her that most police officers were there to help and protect people. She continued walking, humming softly to herself. But something felt different this time. The cruiser maintained its slow pace, matching her steps. Jasmine remembered more of her mother's advice. If something doesn't feel right, trust your instincts. She pulled out her phone, holding it ready in her hand, just as Diana had taught her to do if she ever felt unsafe. Looking ahead, Jasmine could see her street was just 2 blocks away. Mrs. Davis, their elderly neighbor, was watering her prized rose bushes in her front yard. The familiar sight usually brought comfort, but right now, Jasmine's heart was beginning to beat faster. The police car was still following her, and she could hear it slowing down even more. She thought about calling her mom but didn't want to worry her if it turned out to be nothing. After all, she was just a kid walking home from the library. Her backpack full of books and her school uniform should make it clear that she wasn't doing anything wrong. Still, her hands grew sweaty as she gripped her phone tighter. The police cruiser's window rolled down with a soft electric whir. Jasmine could see the officer's face in her peripheral vision, but she kept walking, maintaining her pace. Her mother's voice echoed in her head. Stay calm, be respectful, but know your rights. The moment felt frozen in time as Jasmine heard the police car's door begin to open. The sound of boots hitting the pavement seemed to echo through the quiet street. What happened in the next few minutes would change not only Jasmine's life, but the entire community's perspective on justice and equality forever. Hey you, stop right there. Officer Michael Reynolds' sharp voice cut through the peaceful afternoon air. His heavy footsteps grew louder as he approached Jasmine from behind. The young girl's heart pounded in her chest, but she remembered her mother's teachings about staying calm during police encounters. Jasmine stopped walking and turned slowly, keeping her hands visible. She noticed Officer Reynolds' hand resting on his gun belt, making her stomach twist with fear. He was a tall man with cold blue eyes and a stern face that showed no kindness. "What's in the backpack?" Reynolds demanded, his voice harsh and accusatory. He stood too close to Jasmine, trying to make himself look bigger and more intimidating. "Just library books, sir," Jasmine answered politely, her voice steady despite her fear. "I'm coming back from the library. I live just 2 blocks away on Cedar Street. Officer Reynolds' eyes narrowed. We had a report of shoplifting at the convenience store. The suspect matches your description. His tone made it clear he had already decided Jasmine was guilty, even though she had done nothing wrong. Sir, I didn't go into the store. I was just walking past it on my way home, Jasmine explained, thinking about how her mother would handle this situation. You can check my backpack. It only has books for my science project. Mrs. Davis, who had been watching from her garden, started walking toward them. Officer, this is Diana Carter's daughter. She lives right down the street. I've known her since she was a baby. Reynolds ignored the elderly neighbor completely. Put the backpack down and put your hands behind your back, he ordered, pulling out his handcuffs. Tears started forming in Jasmine's eyes, but she fought to keep her voice clear. Please, can I call my mom? She's an FBI agent, and she can explain everything. Yeah, right. Reynolds scoffed, clearly not believing her. Everyone's got some kind of excuse. Put the backpack down, no. More neighbors began gathering on their porches. Mr. Wilson from across the street started recording with his phone. Mrs. Thompson rushed out of her flower shop, still wearing her work apron. This is ridiculous. Mrs. Thompson called out. We all know this child. She comes by here every week. Jasmine slowly took off her backpack, her hands shaking. The heavy book spilled out as it hit the ground, her carefully organized notes scattering across the sidewalk. Her space project, which she had worked so hard on, was now lying in a mess at her feet. Turn around and put your hands behind your back, Reynolds commanded, roughly grabbing Jasmine's arm. The cold metal of the handcuffs clicked around her small wrists, much too tight for a child her size. Please, Jasmine whispered, tears now falling freely. I didn't do anything wrong. Just let me call my mom. More phones were recording now. Someone in the growing crowd shouted, She's just a kid. Another voice called out, This is exactly what's wrong with this country. Officer Reynolds started pushing Jasmine toward his police car, ignoring the protests of the neighbors. Mrs. Davis was already on her phone, her hands shaking as she dialed numbers. Mr. Wilson had moved closer, making sure to get clear video of everything happening. If you don't all back up right now, you'll be arrested for interfering with police business, Reynolds threatened the crowd, his face red with anger. He looked frustrated that so many people were witnessing and recording his actions. As Reynolds opened the back door of his police car, Jasmine caught sight of her reflection in the window. Her neat braids had come loose, and her school uniform was dirty from being handled roughly. She thought about her mom, wondering if she was still in her important FBI meeting, not knowing that her daughter was being arrested for no reason. The neighbors continued filming and calling out in protest as Reynolds pushed Jasmine into the back seat of his patrol car. Through the window, she could see Mrs. Thompson picking up her scattered books and papers, carefully putting them back in her purple backpack. The last thing Jasmine saw before the police car pulled away was Mr. Wilson running in the direction of her house, phone still recording, probably going to find her mother. As the car turned the corner, Jasmine closed her eyes and took deep breaths, just like her mom had taught her. She knew her mother would come for her. Diana Carter was not just any FBI agent. She was a mother who would move heaven and earth to protect her child. The fluorescent lights buzzed harshly overhead as Officer Reynolds marched Jasmine through the police station. Other officers looked up from their desks, some with surprise at seeing such a young girl in handcuffs. Jasmine held her head high, even though her wrists hurt from the tight metal cuffs. Sit there and don't move, Reynolds ordered, pointing to a hard plastic chair near his desk. His voice was still angry, as if he was annoyed that Jasmine hadn't given him a reason to be even rougher with her. A female officer named Martinez watched the scene with concern. She approached Reynolds' desk, speaking in a low voice. Mike, she's just a kid. Why is she cuffed? She matches the description of a shoplifter from the convenience store, Reynolds snapped, but his eyes didn't meet Officer Martinez's questioning gaze. Mind your own business, Sarah. Officer Martinez looked at Jasmine's school uniform and tear-stained face. Did you check with the store owner? Did anyone actually report a theft? Reynolds ignored her questions and started typing aggressively on his computer. The click-clack of his keyboard filled the tense silence. Through the windows, Jasmine could see the sky turning orange as sunset approached. She wondered if her mom was looking for her. Just then, the station's front door burst open. Mr. Wilson, still holding his phone, rushed in with Mrs. Thompson and 3 other neighbors behind him. The flower shop owner was clutching Jasmine's purple backpack. "This is completely unacceptable." Mr. Wilson's voice boomed through the station. "We have video evidence of this officer harassing an innocent child. We want to speak to the captain right now." Reynolds jumped up from his desk. "All of you need to leave immediately, or you'll be arrested for disturbing the peace." "The only person disturbing the peace is you," Mrs. Thompson shot back, her usually gentle voice firm with anger. She turned to Officer Martinez. "Please, this girl is Diana Carter's daughter. Diana is an FBI agent. Someone needs to call her right now." Officer Martinez's eyes widened at this information. She looked at Jasmine with new understanding, then quickly walked to her desk and picked up her phone. Reynolds tried to stop her, but she turned away from him, already dialing. "You're all interfering with police business," Reynolds shouted, his face getting redder by the minute. This suspect was caught in the act of. Caught in the act of what, exactly? A new voice interrupted. Captain Johnson, a tall black woman with graying hair, stood in the doorway of her office. The room fell silent as she walked toward Reynolds' desk. "I've been getting calls for the past 20 minutes about one of my officers handcuffing a 12-year-old girl," Captain Johnson said, her voice calm but stern. "The same calls mention that this girl is the daughter of FBI agent Diana Carter. Would you care to explain, Officer Reynolds?" Before Reynolds could answer, the station's doors opened again. This time, a small crowd of people walked in, many holding up phones showing the video of Jasmine's arrest. Among them was Mr. Rogers, the convenience store owner. "There was no shoplifting at my store today," Mr. Rogers announced loudly. "I've been there since opening, and I know Jasmine. She didn't even come inside. She just walked past, like she does every Tuesday after going to the library." Captain Johnson's expression darkened as she turned back to Reynolds. "Remove those handcuffs immediately." Reynolds hesitated, his authority crumbling around him. "But Captain, the protocol." "Now, Officer Reynolds." Captain Johnson's voice left no room for argument. As Reynolds reluctantly moved to unlock the handcuffs, the station doors flew open one final time. There stood Diana Carter, still in her FBI suit, her badge gleaming at her hip. Her eyes found her daughter immediately, and the look on her face made everyone in the room take a step back. Behind her stood 2 more FBI agents and a man in a suit who was already pulling out his Justice Department credentials. The station fell completely silent, except for the buzz of the fluorescent lights overhead. Diana's voice was deadly quiet as she spoke. "Someone better start explaining why my daughter is in handcuffs, and they better start explaining right now." Jasmine finally let herself cry, not from fear anymore, but from relief. Her mom was here, and everything was about to change. Diana Carter moved through the police station like a storm. Her FBI badge caught the harsh fluorescent light as she walked straight to her daughter. The 2 FBI agents behind her, Jackson and Chen, immediately started collecting witness statements, while the Justice Department lawyer, Mr. Brooks, pulled out his notebook. "Baby, are your wrists okay?" Diana asked softly, examining the red marks the handcuffs had left on Jasmine's skin. Her gentle touch was a stark contrast to the fire in her eyes when she looked up at Officer Reynolds. "I'm okay, Mom," Jasmine whispered, finally feeling safe. "I did everything you taught me. I stayed calm and didn't resist." Diana hugged her daughter close, then turned to face Reynolds. The officer had backed up against his desk, his earlier confidence completely gone. Captain Johnson stood nearby, her arms crossed and her expression severe. "Officer Reynolds." Diana's voice was controlled but ice-cold. "You arrested a 12-year-old girl without probable cause, refused to contact her parents, and ignored multiple witnesses vouching for her identity. Would you care to explain your actions?" Reynolds stuttered. "There was a reported shoplifting." "No, there wasn't," Mr. Rogers interrupted from across the room. "I've already told everyone there was no theft reported at my store today. None." Agent Jackson approached with his tablet. "Agent Carter, we've collected 14 different video recordings of the incident from witnesses. The footage clearly shows Officer Reynolds following your daughter for several blocks before the arrest." The Justice Department lawyer, Mr. Brooks, stepped forward. "Captain Johnson, we'll need access to Officer Reynolds' body camera footage, all his previous arrest records, and any civilian complaints filed against him. Captain Johnson nodded firmly. You'll have everything within the hour. Officer Reynolds, surrender your badge and gun. You're on immediate administrative leave pending a full investigation. Reynolds' face turned red again. This is ridiculous. You can't just. Actually, we can. Diana cut him off. This isn't just about what you did to my daughter today. Agent Chen is already reviewing your arrest history, and we're seeing some very disturbing patterns. Mrs. Thompson moved forward, still holding Jasmine's purple backpack. Here, sweetheart. I picked up all your books and papers. Some of them got a bit wrinkled, but I tried my best to save your science project notes. Jasmine took her backpack, managing a small smile. Thank you, Mrs. Thompson, and thank you, everyone, for helping me. The crowd of neighbors who had followed them to the station nodded and smiled back. Mr. Wilson stepped forward, holding up his phone. We've already sent copies of our videos to the local news stations. This kind of behavior from police has to stop. Officer Martinez approached Diana with a concerned look. Agent Carter, I want to apologize. I should have stepped in sooner when I saw how Officer Reynolds was treating your daughter. Diana's expression softened slightly. Thank you, Officer Martinez. We'll need your statement as well. It's important to have honest officers speak up when they witness misconduct. Meanwhile, Mr. Brooks was setting up his laptop at an empty desk. We'll need statements from everyone who witnessed any part of this incident. This will likely become part of a larger civil rights investigation. Captain Johnson turned to address all the officers in the station. Everyone watch and learn. This is what happens when we abuse our authority and forget who we're supposed to protect and serve. Diana knelt down to be at eye level with Jasmine. You did everything right today, baby. I am so proud of how brave you were. Now we're going to make sure this never happens to another child in this community. Jasmine hugged her mother tightly. Mom, what's going to happen now? Now. Diana stood up, keeping one arm around her daughter. Now we're going to show Officer Reynolds and anyone else who thinks they can abuse their power that justice works both ways. The FBI's Civil Rights Division isn't just my job. It's my mission to protect everyone's children, not just my own. As mother and daughter prepared to leave the station, Diana turned back one last time. Mr. Brooks, I want Officer Reynolds' entire career investigated. Every arrest, every complaint, every traffic stop. And Captain Johnson, I expect your department's full cooperation. The station buzzed with activity as agents collected statements and evidence. Reynolds sat alone at his desk, his badge and gun gone, watching as his actions from one prejudiced afternoon began to unravel his entire career. The small crowd of neighbors who had stood up for Jasmine felt a sense of victory. Today, at least, justice would be served. 1 week after Jasmine's arrest, Diana Carter sat in her FBI office, surrounded by stacks of files. Her team had been working day and night, reviewing Officer Reynolds' entire career history. What they found made her blood boil. Agent Carter, you need to see this. Agent Chen called from her desk outside Diana's office. She walked in carrying a thick folder filled with complaint reports. We found 27 similar incidents in the past 3 years alone. Reynolds targeted minority children and teenagers, especially around schools and libraries. Diana took the folder, her hands shaking slightly with anger. And nothing was done about these complaints. They were all marked as resolved or unfounded, without proper investigation. Agent Jackson added, entering the office with his laptop. But we tracked down 15 of the families. They're all willing to testify about how Reynolds treated their children. The office door opened again, and Mr. Brooks from the Justice Department walked in. He looked tired but determined. The body camera footage from Jasmine's arrest just came in. Reynolds turned off his camera when he first started following her, but turned it back on during the arrest. That's a direct violation of department policy. Diana stood up and walked to the large whiteboard where they had mapped out Reynolds' pattern of behavior. Red pins marked incidents involving children, blue pins for teenagers, and yellow for complaints that were ignored. The board looked like a constellation of injustice. What about Captain Johnson's cooperation? Diana asked, turning to face her team. She's been incredibly helpful, Agent Chen replied. She's provided all the records we requested and has ordered a complete review of every officer's complaint history. She seems genuinely committed to cleaning up her department. Just then, Diana's phone buzzed. It was a text from Jasmine. Mom, my science project won first place. Mrs. Thompson and the neighbors helped me fix all the papers that got messed up. Diana smiled, feeling proud of her daughter's resilience. The community's support had helped Jasmine stay strong through this difficult time. She texted back a quick congratulations before returning to the investigation. There's more, Mr. Brooks said, opening his briefcase. We found evidence that Reynolds had a social media account under a fake name. The posts, he paused, shaking his head. They show clear racial bias going back years. Agent Jackson pulled up some graphs on his laptop. We analyzed his traffic stop data. African American drivers were 6 times more likely to be searched during routine stops. When it came to juvenile encounters, the numbers are even worse. Diana walked to the window of her office, looking out at the city below. This isn't just about one bad officer anymore. The whole system that protected him needs to change. The door opened again, and Officer Martinez from the police station walked in. She had become a valuable witness in the investigation. Agent Carter, 5 more officers have come forward. They want to report similar incidents they witnessed but were afraid to speak up about before. The media coverage of Jasmine's case has opened the floodgates, Agent Chen added. People are finally feeling brave enough to come forward with their stories. Diana turned back to her team. All right, here's what we're going to do. Jackson, coordinate with those 5 officers. Get their statements today. Chen, start interviewing the families you tracked down. Mr. Brooks, prepare the civil rights violation charges. We're not just going after Reynolds. We're going after everyone who helped cover up his actions. Officer Martinez spoke up again. The police union is trying to protect Reynolds. They're claiming he had probable cause and followed procedure. Let them try, Diana replied firmly. We have video evidence, witness statements, his own body camera violations, and now his social media posts. More importantly, we have a community that's no longer afraid to speak up. She picked up the photo on her desk. It was Jasmine at her science fair, smiling proudly next to her project about space exploration. The same project that had been scattered across the sidewalk during her arrest was now a symbol of her triumph over injustice. Reynolds thought he could get away with terrorizing children because no one would stand up to him, Diana said, her voice filled with determination. He didn't expect one of those children to have a mother who could fight back. Now, we're going to fight for all the children he hurt, and make sure this never happens again. The team nodded in agreement, each returning to their tasks with renewed purpose. They all knew that Jasmine's case had become something bigger, a chance to create real change in a system that had protected bad officers for far too long. 2 weeks after the arrest, the Silver Oak Community Center was packed with people. Chairs filled every available space, and people stood along the walls. At the front of the room, Jasmine sat between her mother and Mrs. Thompson, watching as more neighbors kept streaming in. The local news crews had set up their cameras at the back of the room. Jasmine's story had gone viral after Mr. Wilson shared his video online, and now the whole country was watching what would happen next. Captain Johnson stood at the podium, facing the crowd. Today, we're here to discuss major changes in our police department. But first, I want to apologize publicly to Jasmine Carter and her family. What happened 2 weeks ago was unacceptable, and it opened our eyes to serious problems in our department. Diana squeezed her daughter's hand as Captain Johnson continued. Officer Reynolds has been fired, effective immediately. But that's just the beginning. We discovered that he was involved in at least 27 similar incidents targeting minority children and teenagers. The room erupted in angry murmurs. Mrs. Davis, who had witnessed Jasmine's arrest from her garden, stood up. How many other officers like him are still on the force? That's exactly what we're addressing, Captain Johnson replied. We're implementing new policies, including mandatory body camera use at all times, weekly review of all juvenile encounters, and a new civilian oversight committee. Mr. Rogers from the convenience store raised his hand. Who will be on this committee? Diana stepped up to the podium. The FBI's Civil Rights Division will help set up the committee. We want community members, parents, teachers, and youth representatives to be involved. My daughter's case showed us how important it is for the community to have a voice. Jasmine watched as her mother explained the new changes. She felt proud, but also a little nervous when people kept looking at her. Mrs. Thompson noticed and patted her hand gently. "You've started something important, dear," the flower shop owner whispered. "Sometimes the smallest people can make the biggest changes." Agent Chen, who had been working with Diana on the investigation, stepped forward with some papers. "We've also discovered that Officer Reynolds isn't the only problem. 5 other officers have been placed on leave pending investigation, and we're reviewing every juvenile arrest from the past 5 years." The crowd listened intently as Agent Chen explained how they found patterns of discrimination in traffic stops, school patrols, and park surveillance. Some people nodded, having experienced these issues themselves but never feeling brave enough to speak up before. Then something unexpected happened. A young boy, about Jasmine's age, stood up in the middle of the room. "Officer Reynolds arrested my big brother last year for just sitting on a park bench. Nobody believed us when we complained." More people started standing up, sharing their stories. Each one had faced similar treatment, but their complaints had been ignored or dismissed. The room filled with voices that had been silent for too long. Mr. Brooks, the Justice Department lawyer, took notes as people spoke. He had already filed civil rights charges against Reynolds, but now it was clear that the case needed to expand. Jasmine listened to all the stories, realizing that what happened to her wasn't just a single bad day. It was part of a bigger problem that needed fixing. She pulled out her notebook, the same one that had been scattered on the sidewalk during her arrest, and started writing. Diana noticed her daughter writing and leaned over. "What are you working on, baby?" "I'm starting a kids group," Jasmine explained quietly, "so we can teach other kids what to do if they get stopped by police and how to report bad officers. Like how you taught me to stay calm and remember details." Mrs. Thompson overheard and smiled proudly. "That's a wonderful idea. We could meet at my flower shop after school." Captain Johnson was still speaking about changes in police training when Mr. Wilson stood up again. "These changes sound good, but how do we know they'll really happen? How can we trust the police again?" Diana returned to the podium. "That's why we need everyone in this room to stay involved. This isn't just about my daughter anymore. It's about making sure every child in this community feels safe and protected. The FBI will monitor these changes, but we need the community to be our eyes and ears." As the meeting continued, Jasmine kept writing in her notebook. She had titled her new project Kids for Justice, and underneath, she wrote, "Because every kid deserves to feel safe walking home from the library." 3 months after the incident, Mrs. Thompson's flower shop had become the unofficial headquarters of Kids for Justice. The back room, usually used for arranging flowers, was now filled with children of all ages and backgrounds. Colorful posters covered the walls, and the sweet smell of fresh flowers mixed with the excitement of young voices. Jasmine stood at the front of the room, no longer the scared girl who had been wrongly arrested. She had grown more confident, wearing her purple backpack like a badge of honor. Today, she was teaching other kids about their rights. "Remember," she explained to the group, "if an officer stops you, stay calm and ask to call your parents. You have that right." She wrote the words on a big whiteboard that Mr. Wilson had donated to their group. Diana watched proudly from the doorway. She had just finished another day of investigations at the FBI office, but she never missed these meetings. The changes they were seeing in the community made all the hard work worth it. "Agent Carter," Officer Martinez called, walking into the shop. She was now part of the new Community Relations Unit, created after Reynolds' firing. "The new training program you helped design is working. All officers must now spend time volunteering with youth groups before they can patrol near schools." The children welcomed Officer Martinez warmly. This was part of the new bridge building program, having good officers interact regularly with community kids. It helped the children see that not all police were like Reynolds, while reminding officers who they were really supposed to protect. Jasmine, a young girl named Sarah, raised her hand. "Can you tell us about your mom's big case again? The one about Officer Reynolds?" Jasmine smiled and nodded. She had told this story many times, but it was important for everyone to hear it. "After what happened to me, my mom's FBI team found out that Officer Reynolds had been hurting lots of kids like us. But because of the videos people took, and because everyone in the neighborhood stood up for what was right, you can't hurt anyone anymore. And it's not just Reynolds," Diana added, stepping forward. "The investigation has led to changes in police departments across the state. 5 other cities are now using our new training program." Mrs. Thompson brought in a tray of cookies, beaming at how her flower shop had become a place of positive change. The walls that once only held pictures of flowers now displayed newspaper articles about police reform and children's artwork about justice and equality. Next week, Jasmine announced excitedly, "We're starting our new project. Everyone will get a journal to write down their experiences with police officers, good and bad. This way, we can show which officers are helping our community and which ones need more training." The kids cheered at this idea. Many of them had already shared their stories in the group, finding strength in knowing they weren't alone. Some had even spoken at city council meetings, their young voices demanding change. Mr. Brooks, who had become a regular visitor, entered the shop with good news. The Justice Department has officially charged Reynolds with civil rights violations. But more importantly, your Kids for Justice program is being recognized as a national model. Other cities want to start similar groups. Diana's phone buzzed with a message from Captain Johnson. The police department's latest statistics showed a 70% drop in complaints about officer behavior, and community trust was slowly building back up. The new Civilian Oversight Committee, which included 2 teenage members, was making a real difference. "Mom," Jasmine called out, "can we tell them about the summer program?" Diana nodded proudly. The FBI is starting a summer leadership program for young people who want to learn about law enforcement and civil rights. And guess who helped design it? All the kids pointed at Jasmine, who blushed but stood tall. Her original science project about space still won first place at the fair, but she had found a new passion in helping other kids feel safe and strong. As the meeting wrapped up, Mrs. Thompson handed out fresh flowers to everyone, a tradition she had started to remind the children that beautiful things could grow from difficult situations. The kids left the shop chattering excitedly about their new journals and the upcoming summer program. Watching them leave, Diana hugged her daughter close. "You know, sometimes the worst days can lead to the best changes. You didn't just stand up for yourself that day. You started a movement that's helping kids everywhere." Jasmine looked up at her mom with determined eyes. "And we're not done yet, right?" "Not even close, baby," Diana smiled. "Not even close." 1 year after Jasmine's arrest, the Silver Oak Community Center was once again packed with people. This time, though, it was for a celebration. Colorful banners hummed from the walls, and news cameras captured the moment as Jasmine, now 13, stepped up to the podium to receive the Young Leadership Award. Diana sat in the front row, wiping proud tears from her eyes. Next to her, Mrs. Thompson held a bouquet of flowers from her shop, and Mr. Wilson had his phone ready to record, just like he did on that life-changing day a year ago. "When I was wrongly arrested for walking home from the library," Jasmine began her speech, her voice clear and confident. "I was scared. But my mom taught me to be strong, and our community taught me that when we stand together, we can make real change happen." The audience listened intently as she continued. Behind her on a large screen, pictures showed the amazing progress of the past year. Kids for Justice meetings at Mrs. Thompson's flower shop, the new police training programs, community events with Officer Martinez and other good police officers, and children speaking at city council meetings. "Today, I'm not here just to accept an award," Jasmine said, looking at all the familiar faces in the crowd. "I'm here to announce that Kids for Justice is expanding to 50 more cities across the country. The Justice Department is helping us set up chapters everywhere so every kid can feel safe in their community." Mr. Brooks stood up from his seat, holding an official-looking document. "Thanks to Jasmine's case and the evidence we gathered, the state has passed the Youth Protection Act. This new law requires special training for officers who work near schools and strict punishment for those who abuse their power against minors." Captain Johnson, who had become a strong ally in police reform, stepped forward. "Our department is now a national model for community policing. Officer Reynolds' case showed us what was wrong, but Jasmine and Kids for Justice showed us how to make it right." Diana was called to the podium next. She had recently been promoted to lead a new FBI task force focused on protecting children's civil rights. A year ago, an officer thought he could get away with terrorizing a child because of her race. He didn't expect that child to have a mother in the FBI, a community willing to stand up for her, and the courage to turn her pain into positive change. The screen behind them showed more images. Reynolds and the other corrupt officers being led away in handcuffs, the Civilian Oversight Committee at work, and teenagers teaching younger kids about their rights at Mrs. Thompson's flower shop. But the best change, Diana continued, smiling at her daughter, is seeing our children grow stronger and braver. They're not just learning their rights, they're teaching others and building bridges between law enforcement and the community. Officer Martinez, now promoted to lead the Community Relations Unit, presented Jasmine with another surprise. We're starting a scholarship program for kids who want to study criminal justice or civil rights law. It's called the Jasmine Carter Scholarship for Justice, and you're our first recipient. Tears filled Jasmine's eyes as she accepted the certificate. She hadn't expected this at all. Her original dream of becoming an astronaut had shifted. Now she wanted to become a civil rights lawyer like Mr. Brooks. Remember that purple backpack full of science books? Jasmine asked the crowd, holding up her old backpack, now a symbol of her journey. It taught me that sometimes life changes your plans. I still love space and science, but now I know my real mission is here on Earth, helping other kids reach for their dreams without fear. The ceremony ended with a special moment that brought everything full circle. The convenience store where Jasmine had been wrongly accused was now displaying a huge mural painted by local kids. It showed children of all backgrounds walking together, with the words, "Justice grows here," surrounded by Mrs. Thompson's flowers. As people gathered for pictures afterward, Diana hugged her daughter tight. "You know what the best part is?" she whispered. "What, Mom?" "Every time a kid walks past that store now, they don't feel fear. They feel hope. You did that, baby. You turned one bad moment into 1,000 good ones." Jasmine looked around at her community, Mrs. Thompson arranging flowers for everyone, Mr. Wilson still recording every moment, Officer Martinez chatting with kids, and Mr. Brooks discussing future plans. She realized that sometimes the worst days could lead to the best changes, but only if you were brave enough to stand up and fight for what's right. The purple backpack sat proudly next to her award, a reminder that justice, like knowledge, was something worth carrying with you every day.